The Tarn of Sacrifice by Algernon Blackwood. John Holt, a vague excitement in him, stood at the door of the little inn, listening to the landlord's directions as to the best way of reaching Scarsdale. He was on a walking tour through the Lake District, exploring the smaller dales that lie away from the beaten track and are accessible only on foot. The landlord, a hard-featured north countryman, half innkeeper, half sheep farmer, pointed up the valley. His deep voice had a friendly burr in it. "You go straight on till you reach the head," he said, "then take to the fell. Follow the sheep trod past the crag. Directly you're over the top, you'll strike the road." "A road up there!" exclaimed his customer, incredulously. "Aye," was the steady reply. "The old Roman road, the same road," he added. "The savages came down when they burst through the wall and burnt everything right up to Lancaster. They were held, weren't they?" "At Lancaster?" asked the other, yet not knowing quite why he asked it. "I don't rightly know," came the answer slowly. "Some say they were, but the old town has been that built over since. It's hard to tell." He paused a moment. "At Ambleside," he went on presently, "you can still see the marks of the burning, and at the little fort on the way to Ravenglass." Holt strained his eyes into the sunlit distance, for he would soon have to walk that road, and he was anxious to be off. But the landlord was communicative and interesting. "You can't miss it," he told him. "It runs straight as a spear along the fell top till it meets the wall. You must hold to it for about 8 miles. Then you'll come to the standing stone on the left of the track." "The standing stone, yes?" broke in the other, a little eagerly. "You'll see the stone right enough. It was where the Romans came. Then bear to the left down another trod that comes into the road there. They say it was the war trail of the folk that set up the stone." "And what did they use the stone for?" Holt inquired, more as though he asked it of himself than of his companion. The old man paused to reflect. He spoke at length. "I mind an old fellow who seemed to know about such things called it a sighting stone. He reckoned the sun shone over it at dawn on the longest day, right on to the little holm in Blood Tarn. He said they held sacrifices in a stone circle there." He stopped a moment to puff at his black pipe. Maybe he was right. I have seen stones lying about that may well be that. The man was pleased and willing to talk to so good a listener. Either he had not noticed the curious gesture the other made, or he read it as a sign of eagerness to start. The sun was warm, but a sharp wind from the bare hills went between them with a sighing sound. Holt buttoned his coat about him. "An odd name for a mountain lake. Blood Tarn," he remarked, watching the landlord's face expectantly. "Aye, but a good one," was the measured reply. "When I was a boy, the old folk had a tale that the savages flung 3 Roman captives from that crag into the water. There's a book been written about it. They say it was a sacrifice, but most likely they were tired of dragging them along, I say. Anyway, that's what the writer said. One, I mind, now you ask me, was a priest of some heathen temple that stood near the wall, and the other 2 were his daughter and her lover." He guffawed. At least he made a strange noise in his throat. Evidently, thought Holt, he was skeptical yet superstitious. "It's just an old tale handed down, whatever the learned folk may say," the old man added. "A lonely place," began Holt, aware that a fleeting touch of awe was added suddenly to his interest. "Aye," said the other, "and a bad spot, too. Every year the crag takes its toll of sheep, and sometimes a man goes over in the mist. It's right beside the track and very slippery. 90 foot of a drop before you hit the water. Best keep round the tarn and leave the crag alone if there's any mist about. Fishing? Yes, there's some quite fair trout in the tarn, but it's not much fished. Happen one of the shepherd lads from Tyson's farm may give it a turn with an otter, he went on, once in a while, but he won't stay for the evening. He'll clear out before sunset. Ah, superstitious, I suppose. It's a gloomy, chancy spot, and with the dusk falling, agreed the innkeeper eventually. None of our folk care to be caught up there, with night coming on. Most handy for a shepherd, too, but Tyson can't get a man to bide there. He paused again, then added significantly, Strangers don't seem to mind it, though. It's only our own folk. Strangers, repeated the other sharply, as though he had been waiting all along for this special bit of information. You don't mean to say there are people living up there? A curious thrill ran over him. Aye, replied the landlord, but they're daft folk, a man and his daughter. They come every spring. It's early in the year yet. But I mind Jim Backhouse, one of Tyson's men, talking about them last week. He stopped to think. So they've come back, he went on decidedly. They get milk from the farm. And what on earth are they doing up there? Holt asked. He asked many other questions as well, but the answers were poor, the information not forthcoming. The landlord would talk for hours about the crag, the tarn, the legends, and the Romans, but concerning the two strangers he was uncommunicative. Either he knew little, or he did not want to discuss them. Holt felt it was probably the former. They were educated town folk, he gathered with difficulty, rich apparently, and they spent their time wandering about the fell or fishing. The man was often seen upon the crag, his girl beside him, bare-legged, dressed as a peasant. Happen they come for their health. Happen the father is a learned man studying the wall. Exact information was not forthcoming. The landlord minded his own business, and inhabitants were too few and far between for gossip. All Holt could extract amounted to this. The couple had been in a motor accident some years before, and as a result they came every spring to spend a month or two in absolute solitude, away from cities and the excitement of modern life. They troubled no one, and no one troubled them. Perhaps I may see them as I go by the tarn, remarked the walker finally, making ready to go. He gave up questioning in despair. The morning hours were passing. Happen you may, was the reply, for your track goes past their door and leads straight down to Scarsdale. The other way over the crag saves half a mile, but it's rough going along the scree. He stopped dead. Then he added, in reply to Holt's goodbye, In my opinion, it's not worth it. Yet what he meant exactly by it was not quite clear. The walker shouldered his knapsack. Instinctively he gave the little hitch to settle it on his shoulders, much as he used to give to his pack in France. The pain that shot through him as he did so was another reminder of France. The bullet he had stopped on the Somme still made its presence, felt at times. Yet he knew, as he walked off briskly, that he was one of the lucky ones. How many of his old pals would never walk again, condemned to hobble on crutches for the rest of their lives? How many, again, would never even hobble? More terrible still, he remembered, were the blind. The dead, it seemed to him, had been more fortunate. He swung up the narrowing valley at a good pace and was soon climbing the fell. It proved far steeper than it had appeared from the door of the inn, and he was glad enough to reach the top and fling himself down on the coarse, springy turf to admire the view below. The spring day was delicious. It stirred his blood. The world beneath looked young and stainless. Emotion rose through him in a wave of optimistic happiness. The bare hills were half hidden by a soft blue haze that made them look bigger, vaster, less earthly than they really were. He saw silver streaks in the valleys that he knew were distant streams and lakes. Birds soared between. The dazzling air seemed painted with exhilarating light and colour. The very clouds were floating gossamer that he could touch. There were bees and dragonflies and fluttering thistledown. Heat vibrated. His body, his physical sensations, so-called, retired into almost nothing. He felt himself, like his surroundings, made of air and sunlight. A delicious sense of resignation poured upon him. He too, like his surroundings, was composed of air and sunshine, of insect wings, of soft, fluttering vibrations that the gorgeous spring day produced. It seemed that he renounced the heavy dues of bodily life, and enjoyed the delights, momentarily at any rate, of a more ethereal consciousness. Near at hand, the hills were covered with the faded gold of last year's bracken, which ran down in a brimming flood till it was lost in the fresh green of the familiar woods below. Far in the hazy distance swam the sea of ash and hazel. The silver birch sprinkled that lower world with fairy light. Yes, it was all natural enough. He could see the road quite clearly now, only 100 yards away from where he lay. How straight it ran along the top of the hill. The landlord's expression recurred to him. Straight as a spear. Somehow, the phrase seemed to describe exactly the Romans and all their works. The Romans, yes, and all their works. He became aware of a sudden sympathy with these long-dead conquerors of the world. With them, he felt sure, there had been no useless, foolish talk. They had known no empty words, no banding of foolish phrases. War to end war, and regeneration of the race. No hypocritical nonsense of that sort had troubled their minds and purposes. They had not attempted to cover up the horrible in words. With them had been no childish, vain pretense. They had gone straight to their ends. Other thoughts, too, stole over him as he sat gazing down upon the track of that ancient road. Strange thoughts, not wholly welcome. New, yet old, emotions rose in a tide upon him. He began to wonder. Had he, after all, become brutalized by the war? He knew quite well that the little Christianity he inherited had soon fallen from him like a garment in France. In his attitude to life and death, he had become, frankly, pagan. He now realized, abruptly, another thing as well. In reality, he had never been a Christian at any time. Given to him with his mother's milk, he had never accepted, felt at home with Christian dogmas. To him, they had always been an alien creed. Christianity met none of his requirements. But what were his requirements? He found it difficult to answer. Something, at any rate, different and more primitive, he thought. Even up here, alone on the mountain top, it was hard to be absolutely frank with himself. With a kind of savage, honest determination, he bent himself to the task. It became suddenly important for him. He must know exactly where he stood. It seemed he had reached a turning point in his life. The war, in the objective world, had been one such turning point. Now he had reached another, in the subjective life, and it was more important than the first. As he lay there in the pleasant sunshine, his thoughts went back to the fighting. A friend, he recalled, had divided people into those who enjoyed the war and those who didn't. He was obliged to admit that he had been one of the former. He had thoroughly enjoyed it. Brought up from a youth as an engineer, he had taken to a soldier's life as a duck takes to water. There had been plenty of misery, discomfort, wretchedness, but there had been compensations that, for him, outweighed them. The fierce excitement, the primitive, naked passions, the wild fury, the reckless indifference to pain and death, with the loss of the normal, cautious, pettifogging little daily self all these involved, had satisfied him. Even the actual killing. He started. A slight shudder ran down his back as the cool wind from the open moorlands came sighing across the soft spring sunshine. Sitting up straight, he looked behind him a moment, as with an effort to turn away from something he disliked and dreaded, because it was, he knew, too strong for him. But the same instant he turned round again. He faced the vile and dreadful thing in himself he had hitherto sought to deny, evade. Pretense fell away. He could not disguise from himself that he had thoroughly enjoyed the killing, or at any rate had not been shocked by it as by an unnatural and ghastly duty. The shooting and bombing he performed with an effort always, but the rarer moments when he had been able to use the bayonet, the joy of feeling the steel go home. He started again, hiding his face a moment in his hands, but he did not try to evade the hideous memories that surged. At times he knew he had gone quite mad with the lust of slaughter. He had gone on long after he should have stopped. Once an officer had pulled him up sharply for it, but the next instant had been killed by a bullet. He thought he had gone on killing, but he did not know. It was all a red mist before his eyes, and he could only remember the sticky feeling of the blood on his hands when he gripped his rifle. And now, at this moment of painful honesty with himself, he realized that his creed, whatever it was, must cover all that. It must provide some sort of a philosophy for it. Must neither apologize nor ignore it. The heaven that it promised must be a man's heaven. The Christian heaven made no appeal to him. He could not believe in it. The ritual must be simple and direct. He felt that in some dim way he understood why those old people had thrown their captives from the crag. The sacrifice of an animal victim that could be eaten afterwards with due ceremonial did not shock him. Such methods seemed simple, natural, effective. Yet would it not have been better? The horrid thought rose unbidden in his inmost mind. Better to have cut their throats with a flint knife. Slowly? Horror-stricken, he sprang to his feet. These terrible thoughts he could not recognize as his own. Had he slept a moment in the sunlight, dreaming them? Was it some hideous nightmare flash that touched him as he dozed a second? Something of fear and awe stole over him. He stared round for some minutes into the emptiness of the desolate landscape, then hurriedly ran down to the road, hoping to exorcise the strange sudden horror by vigorous movement. Yet when he reached the track, he knew that he had not succeeded. The awful pictures were gone, perhaps, but the mood remained. It was as though some new attitude began to take definite form and harden within him. He walked on, trying to pretend to himself that he was some forgotten legionary, marching up with his fellows to defend the wall. Half unconsciously, he fell into the steady tramping pace of his old regiment. The words of the ribald songs they had sung going to the front came pouring into his mind. Steadily, and almost mechanically, he swung along till he saw the stone as a black speck on the left of the track, and the instant he saw it, there rose in him the feeling that he stood upon the edge of an adventure that he feared yet longed for. He approached the great granite monolith with a curious thrill of anticipatory excitement, born he knew not whence. But of course, there was nothing. Common sense, still operating strongly, had warned him there would be, could be, nothing. In the waste, the great stone stood upright, solitary, forbidding, as it had stood for thousands of years. It dominated the landscape somewhat ominously. The sheep and cattle had used it as a rubbing stone, and bits of hair and wool clung to its rough, weather-eaten edges. The feet of generations had worn a cup-shaped hollow at its base. The wind sighed round it plaintively. Its bulk glistened as it took the sun. A short mile away, the blood tarn was now plainly visible. He could see the little holm lying in a direct line with the stone, while, overhanging the water as a dark shadow on one side, rose the cliff-like rock they called the crag. Of the house the landlord had mentioned, however, he could see no trace, as he relieved his shoulders of the knapsack and sat down to enjoy his lunch. The tarn, he reflected, was certainly a gloomy place. He could understand that the simple, superstitious shepherds did not dare to live there, for even on this bright spring day it wore a dismal and forbidding look. With failing light, when the crag sprawled its big lengthening shadow across the water, he could well imagine they would give it the widest possible berth. He strolled down to the shore after lunch, smoking his pipe lazily, then suddenly stood still. At the far end, hidden hitherto by a fold in the ground, he saw the little house, a faint column of blue smoke rising from the chimney, and at the same moment a woman came out of the low door and began to walk towards the tarn. She had seen him. She was moving evidently in his direction. A few minutes later she stopped and stood waiting on the path. Waiting, he well knew, for him. And his earlier mood, the mood he dreaded yet had forced himself to recognize, came back upon him with sudden redoubled power. As in some vivid dream that dominates and paralyzes the will, or as in the first stages of an imposed hypnotic spell, all question, hesitation, refusal sank away. He felt a pleasurable resignation steal upon him with soft, numbing effect. Denial and criticism ceased to operate, and common sense died with them. He yielded his being automatically to the deeps of an adventure he did not understand. He began to walk towards the woman. It was, he saw as he drew nearer, the figure of a young girl, 19 or 20 years of age, who stood there motionless with her eyes fixed steadily on his own. She looked as wild and picturesque as the scene that framed her. Thick black hair hung loose over her back and shoulders. About her head was bound a green ribbon. Her clothes consisted of a jersey and a very short skirt, which showed her bare legs browned by exposure to the sun and wind. A pair of rough sandals covered her feet. Whether the face was beautiful or not, he could not tell. He only knew that it attracted him immensely, and with a strength of appeal that he at once felt curiously irresistible. She remained motionless against the boulder, staring fixedly at him till he was close before her. Then she spoke. "I am glad that you have come at last," she said, in a clear, strong voice that yet was soft and even tender. "We have been expecting you." "You have been expecting me," he repeated, astonished beyond words, yet finding the language natural, right and true. A stream of sweet feeling invaded him. His heart beat faster. He felt happy and at home in some extraordinary way he could not understand, yet did not question. "Of course," she answered, looking straight into his eyes with welcome unashamed. Her next words thrilled him to the core of his being. "I have made the room ready for you." Quick upon her own, however, flashed back the landlord's words, while common sense made a last faint effort in his thought. He was the victim of some absurd mistake, evidently. The lonely life, the forbidding surroundings, the associations of the desolate hills had affected her mind. He remembered the accident. "I am afraid," he offered, lamely enough, "there is some mistake. I am not the friend you were expecting. He stopped. A thin, slight sound, as of distant laughter, seemed to echo behind the unconvincing words. "There is no mistake," the girl answered firmly, with a quiet smile, moving a step nearer to him, so that he caught the subtle perfume of her vigorous youth. "I saw you clearly in the Mystery Stone. I recognized you at once." "The Mystery Stone," he heard himself saying, bewilderment increasing, a sense of wild happiness growing with it. Laughing, she took his hand in hers. "Come," she said, drawing him along with her. "Come home with me. My father will be waiting for us. He will tell you everything, and better far than I can." He went with her, feeling that he was made of sunlight and that he walked on air. For at her touch his own hand responded, as with a sudden fierceness of pleasure that he failed utterly to understand, yet did not question for an instant. Wildly, absurdly, madly it flashed across his mind. This is the woman I shall marry. My woman. I am her man. They walked in silence for a little, for no words of any sort offered themselves to his mind. Nor did the girl attempt to speak. The total absence of embarrassment between them occurred to him once or twice as curious, though the very idea of embarrassment then disappeared entirely. It all seemed natural and unforced, the sudden intercourse as familiar and effortless as though they had known one another always. "The Mystery Stone," he heard himself saying presently, as the idea rose again to the surface of his mind. "I should like to know more about it." "Tell me, dear." "I bought it with the other things," she replied softly. "What other things?" She turned and looked up into his face with a slight expression of surprise. Their shoulders touched as they swung along. Her hair blew in the wind across his coat. "The bronze collar," she answered, in the low voice that pleased him so, "and this ornament that I wear in my hair." He glanced down to examine it. Instead of a ribbon, as he had first supposed, he saw that it was a circlet of bronze, covered with a beautiful green patina, and evidently very old. In front, above the forehead, was a small disc bearing an inscription he could not decipher at the moment. He bent down and kissed her hair, the girl smiling with happy contentment, but offering no sign of resistance or annoyance. "And," she added suddenly, "the dagger." Holt started visibly. This time there was a thrill in her voice that seemed to pierce down straight into his heart. He said nothing, however. The unexpectedness of the word she used, together with the note in her voice that moved him so strangely, had a disconcerting effect that kept him silent for a time. He did not ask about the dagger. Something prevented his curiosity finding expression in speech, though the word, with the marked accent she placed upon it, had struck into him like the shock of sudden steel itself, causing him an indecipherable emotion of both joy and pain. He asked instead, presently, another question, and a very commonplace one. He asked where she and her father had lived before they came to these lonely hills. And the form of his question, his voice shook a little as he said it, was again an effort of his normal self to maintain its already precarious balance. The effect of his simple query, the girl's reply above all, increased in him the mingled sensations of sweetness and menace, of joy and dread that half alarmed, half satisfied him. For a moment she wore a puzzled expression, as though making an effort to remember. "Down by the sea," she answered slowly, thoughtfully, her voice very low. "Somewhere by a big harbor, with great ships coming in and out. It was there we had the break, the shock, an accident that broke us, shattering the dream we share today." Her face cleared a little. "We were in a chariot," she went on more easily and rapidly, "and my father was injured, so that I went with him to a palace beyond the wall till he grew well. You were in a chariot? Holt repeated. Surely not. Did I say chariot? The girl replied. How foolish of me. She shook her hair back, as though the gesture helped to clear her mind and memory. That belongs, of course, to the other dream. No, not a chariot. It was a car, but it had wheels like a chariot. The old war chariots, you know. Disc wheels, thought Holt to himself. He did not ask about the palace. He asked instead where she had bought the mystery stone, as she called it, and the other things. Her reply bemused and enticed him farther, for he could not unravel it. His whole inner attitude was shifting with uncanny rapidity and completeness. They walked together, he now realized, with linked arms, moving slowly in step, their bodies touching. He felt the blood run hot and almost savage in his veins. He was aware how amazingly precious she was to him, how deeply, absolutely necessary to his life and happiness. Her words went past him in the mountain wind like flying birds. My father was fishing, she went on, and I was on my way to join him, when the old woman called me into her dwelling and showed me the things. She wished to give them to me, but I refused the present and paid for them in gold. I put the fillet on my head to see if it would fit, and took the mystery stone in my hand. Then, as I looked deep into the stone, this present dream died all away. It faded out. I saw the older dreams again. Our dreams. The older dreams, interrupted Holt. Ours. But instead of saying the words aloud, they issued from his lips in a quiet whisper, as though control of his voice had passed a little from him. The sweetness in him became more wonderful, unmanageable. His astonishment had vanished. He walked and talked with his old familiar happy love, the woman he had sought so long and waited for, the woman who was his mate, as he was hers, she who alone could satisfy his inmost soul. The old dream, she replied, the very old, the oldest of all, perhaps, when we committed the terrible sacrilege. I saw the high priest lying dead, whom my father slew, and the other whom you destroyed. I saw you prize out the jewel from the image of the god, with your short, bloody spear. I saw, too, our flight to the galley through the hot, awful night beneath the stars, and our escape. Her voice died away, and she fell silent. Tell me more, he whispered, drawing her closer against his side. What had you done? His heart was racing now. Some fighting blood surged uppermost. He felt that he could kill, and the joy of violence and slaughter rose in him. Have you forgotten so completely? She asked, very low, as he pressed her more tightly still against his heart. And almost beneath her breath, she whispered into his ear, which he bent to catch the little sound. I had broken my vows with you. What else, my lovely one? My best beloved? What more did you see? He whispered in return, yet wondering why the fierce pain and anger that he felt behind still lay hidden from betrayal. Dream after dream, and always we were punished. But the last time was the clearest, for it was here where we now walk together in the sunlight and the wind. It was here the savages hurled us from the rock. A shiver ran through him, making him tremble with an unaccountable touch of cold that communicated itself to her as well. Her arm went instantly about his shoulder as he stooped and kissed her passionately. Fasten your coat about you, she said tenderly, but with troubled breath when he released her. For this wind is chill, although the sun shines brightly. We were glad, you remember, when they stopped to kill us. For we were tired, and our feet were cut to pieces by the long, rough journey from the wall. Then suddenly her voice grew louder again, and the smile of happy confidence came back into her eyes. There was the deep earnestness of love in it, of love that cannot end or die. She looked up into his face. "But soon now," she said, "we shall be free. For you have come, and it is nearly finished, this weary little present dream." "How?" he asked. "Shall we get free?" A red mist swam momentarily before his eyes. "My father," she replied at once, "will tell you all. It is quite easy." "Your father, too, remembers?" "The moment the collar touches him," she said, "he is a priest again. See, here he comes forth already to meet us, and to bid you welcome." Holt looked up, startled. He had hardly noticed. So absorbed had he been in the words that half intoxicated him, the distance they had covered. The cottage was now close at hand, and a tall, powerfully built man, wearing a shepherd's rough clothing, stood a few feet in front of him. His stature, breadth of shoulder, and thick black beard made up a striking figure. The dark eyes, with fire in them, gazed straight into his own, and a kindly smile played round the stern and vigorous mouth. "Greeting, my son," said a deep, booming voice, "for I shall call you my son as I did of old. The bond of the spirit is stronger than that of the flesh, and with us three the tie is indeed of triple strength. You come, too, at an auspicious hour, for the omens are favorable, and the time of our liberation is at hand." He took the other's hand in a grip that might have killed an ox, and yet was warm with gentle kindliness, while Holt, now caught wholly into the spirit of some deep reality he could not master yet accepted, saw that the wrist was small, the fingers shapely, the gesture itself one of dignity and refinement. "Greeting, my father," he replied, as naturally as though he said more modern words. "Come in with me, I pray," pursued the other, leading the way, "and let me show you the poor accommodation we have provided, yet the best that we can offer." He stooped to pass the threshold, and as Holt stooped likewise, the girl took his hand, and he knew that his bewitchment was complete. Entering the low doorway, he passed through a kitchen, where only the roughest, scantiest furniture was visible, into another room that was completely bare. A heap of dried bracken had been spread on the floor in one corner to form a bed. Beside it lay 2 cheap, coloured blankets. There was nothing else. "Our place is poor," said the man, smiling courteously, but with that dignity and air of welcome which made the hovel seem a palace. "Yet it may serve, perhaps, for the short time that you will need it. Our little dream here is well nigh over, now that you have come. The long, weary pilgrimage at last draws to a close." The girl had left them alone a moment, and the man stepped closer to his guest. His face grew solemn, his voice deeper and more earnest suddenly. The light in his eyes seemed actually to flame with the enthusiasm of a great belief. "Why have you tarried thus so long, and where?" he asked in a lowered tone that vibrated in the little space. "We have sought you with prayer and fasting, and she has spent her nights for you in tears. You lost the way, it must be. The lesser dreams entangled your feet, I see." A touch of sadness entered the voice. The eyes held pity in them. "It is, alas, too easy, I well know," he murmured. "It is too easy." "I lost the way," the other replied. It seemed suddenly that his heart was filled with fire. "But now," he cried aloud, "now that I have found her, I will never, never let her go again. My feet are steady, and my way is sure." "For ever and ever, my son," boomed the happy yet almost solemn answer. "She is yours. Our freedom is at hand." He turned and crossed the little kitchen again, making a sign that his guest should follow him. They stood together by the door, looking out across the Tarn in silence. The afternoon sunshine fell in a golden blaze across the bare hills that seemed to smoke with the glory of the fiery light, but the crag loomed dark in shadow overhead, and the little lake lay deep and black beneath it. "A cellar! A cellar!" called the man, the name breaking upon his companion as with a shock of sweet, delicious fire that filled his entire being, as the girl came the same instant from behind the cottage. "The gods call me," said her father. "I go now to the hill. Protect our guest and comfort him in my absence." Without another word, he strode away up the hillside, and presently was visible standing on the summit of the crag, his arms stretched out above his head, to heaven, his great head thrown back, his bearded face turned upwards. An impressive, even a majestic figure he looked, as his bulk and stature rose in dark silhouette against the brilliant evening sky. Holt stood motionless, watching him for several minutes, his heart swelling in his breast, his pulses thumping before some great nameless pressure that rose from the depths of his being. That inner attitude, which seemed a new and yet more satisfying attitude to life than he had known hitherto, had crystallized. Define it he could not. He only knew that he accepted it as natural. It satisfied him. The sight of that dignified, gaunt figure worshipping upon the hilltop inflamed him. "I have brought the stone," a voice interrupted his reflections, and turning, he saw the girl beside him. She held out for his inspection a dark, square object that looked to him, at first like a black stone lying against the brown skin of her hand. "The mystery stone," the girl added, as their faces bent down together to examine it. "It is there I see the dreams I told you of." He took it from her and found that it was heavy, composed apparently of something like black quartz, with a brilliant polished surface that revealed clear depths within. Once, evidently, it had been set in a stand or frame, for the marks where it had been attached still showed, and it was obviously of great age. He felt confused, the mind in him troubled yet excited as he gazed. The effect upon him was as though a wind rose suddenly and passed across his inmost subjective life, setting its entire contents in rushing motion. "And here," the girl said, "is the dagger." He took from her the short bronze weapon, feeling at once instinctively its ragged edge, its keen point, sharp and effective still. The handle had long since rotted away, but the bronze tongue, and the holes where the rivets had been, remained, and as he touched it, the confusion and trouble in his mind increased to a kind of turmoil, in which violence, linked to something tameless, wild and almost savage, was the dominating emotion. He turned to seize the girl and crush her to him in a passionate embrace, but she held away, throwing back her lovely head, her eyes shining, her lips parted, yet one hand stretched out to stop him. "First look into it with me," she said quietly. "Let us see together." She sat down on the turf beside the cottage door, and Holt, obeying, took his place beside her. She remained very still for some minutes, covering the stone with both hands, as though to warm it. Her lips moved. She seemed to be repeating some kind of invocation beneath her breath, though no actual words were audible. Presently her hands parted. They sat together gazing at the polished surface. They looked within. "There comes a white mist in the heart of the stone," the girl whispered. "It will soon open. The pictures will then grow." "Look," she exclaimed after a brief pause. "They are forming now." "I see only mist," her companion murmured, gazing intently. "Only mist I see." She took his hand, and instantly the mist parted. He found himself peering into another landscape, which opened before his eyes as though it were a photograph. Hills covered with heather stretched away on every side. "Hills I see," he whispered. "The ancient hills." "Watch closely," she replied, holding his hand firmly. At first the landscape was devoid of any sign of life. Then suddenly it surged and swarmed with moving figures. Torrents of men poured over the hill crests and down their heathery sides in columns. He could see them clearly. Great hairy men, clad in skins, with thick shields on their left arms or slung over their backs, and short stabbing spears in their hands. Thousands upon thousands poured over in an endless stream. In the distance, he could see other columns sweeping in a turning movement. A few of the men rode rough ponies and seemed to be directing the march, and these, he knew, were the chiefs. The scene grew dimmer, faded, died away completely. Another took its place. By the faint light, he knew that it was dawn. The undulating country, less hilly than before, was still wild and uncultivated. A great wall, with towers at intervals, stretched away till it was lost in shadowy distance. On the nearest of these towers he saw a sentinel clad in armour, gazing out across the rolling country. The armour gleamed faintly in the pale, glimmering light, as the man suddenly snatched up a bugle and blew upon it. From a brazier burning beside him, he next seized a brand and fired a great heap of brushwood. The smoke rose in a dense column into the air almost immediately, and from all directions, with incredible rapidity, figures came pouring up to man the wall. Hurriedly they strung their bows and laid spare arrows close beside them on the coping. The light grew brighter. The whole country was alive with savages. Like the waves of the sea, they came rolling in enormous numbers. For several minutes the wall held. Then, in an impetuous, fearful torrent, they poured over. It faded, died away, was gone again. And a moment later, yet another took its place. But this time the landscape was familiar, and he recognized the Tarn. He saw the savages upon the ledge that flanked the dominating crag. They had 3 captives with them. He saw 2 men. The other was a woman. But the woman had fallen exhausted to the ground, and a chief on a rough pony rode back to see what had delayed the march. Glancing at the captives, he made a fierce gesture with his arm towards the water far below. Instantly, the woman was jerked cruelly to her feet and forced onwards till the summit of the crag was reached. A man snatched something from her hand. A second later, she was hurled over the brink. The 2 men were next dragged on to the dizzy spot where she had stood. Dead with fatigue, bleeding from numerous wounds, yet at this awful moment they straightened themselves, casting contemptuous glances at the fierce savages surrounding them. They were Romans, and would die like Romans. Holt saw their faces clearly for the first time. He sprang up with a cry of anguished fury. "The second man!" he exclaimed. "You saw the second man!" The girl, releasing his hand, turned her eyes slowly up to his, so that he met the flame of her ancient and undying love shining like stars upon him out of the night of time. "Ever since that moment," she said in a low voice that trembled, "I have been looking, waiting for you." He took her in his arms and smothered her words with kisses, holding her fiercely to him as though he would never let her go. "I too," he said, his whole being burning with his love. "I have been looking, waiting for you. Now I have found you. We have found each other." The dusk fell slowly, imperceptibly, as twilight slowly draped the gaunt hills, blotting out familiar details, so the strong dream, veil upon veil, drew closer over the soul of the wanderer, obliterating finally the last reminder of today. The little wind had dropped, and the desolate moors lay silent, but for the hum of distant water falling to its valley bed. His life, too, and the life of the girl he knew were similarly falling into some deep shadowed bed where rest would come at last. No details troubled him, he asked himself no questions. A profound sense of happy peace numbed every nerve and stilled his beating heart. He felt no fear, no anxiety, no hint of alarm or uneasiness vexed his singular contentment. He realized one thing only, that the girl lay in his arms. He held her fast, her breath mingled with his own. They had found each other. What else mattered? From time to time, as the daylight faded and the sun went down behind the moors, she spoke. She uttered words he vaguely heard, listening, though with a certain curious effort. Before he closed the thing she said with kisses, even the fierceness of his blood was gone. The world lay still, life almost ceased to flow. Lapped in the deeps of his great love, he was redeemed, perhaps, of violence and savagery. 3 dark birds, she whispered, pass across the sky. They fall beyond the ridge. The omens are favorable. A hawk now follows them, cleaving the sky with pointed wings. A hawk, he murmured, the badge of my old legion. My father will perform the sacrifice, he heard again, though it seemed a long interval had passed, and the man's figure was now invisible on the crag amid the gathering darkness. Already he prepares the fire. Look, the sacred island is alight. He has the black cock ready for the knife. Holt roused himself with difficulty, lifting his face from the garden of her hair. A faint light, he saw, gleamed fitfully on the holm within the tarn. Her father, then, had descended from the crag and had lit the sacrificial fire upon the stones. But what did the doings of the father matter now to him? The dark bird, he repeated dully. The black victim the gods of the underworld alone accept. It is good, Akela. It is good. He was about to sink back again, taking her against his breast as before, when she resisted and sat up suddenly. It is time, she said aloud. The hour has come. My father climbs, and we must join him on the summit. Come. She took his hand and raised him to his feet, and together they began the rough ascent towards the crag. As they passed along the shore of the tarn of blood, he saw the fire reflected in the ink-black waters. He made out, too, though dimly, a rough circle of big stones with a larger flagstone lying in the centre. 3 small fires of bracken and wood placed in a triangle with its apex towards the standing stone on the distant hill, burned briskly, the crackling material sending out sparks that pierced the columns of thick smoke. And in this smoke, peering, shifting, appearing and disappearing, it seemed he saw great faces moving. The flickering light and twirling smoke made clear sight difficult. His bliss, his lethargy were very deep. They left the tarn below them, and hand in hand began to climb the final slope. Whether the physical effort of climbing disturbed the deep pressure of the mood that numbed his senses, or whether the cold draught of wind they met upon the ridge restored some vital detail of today, Holt does not know. Something, at any rate, in him wavered suddenly, as though a centre of gravity had shifted slightly. There was a perceptible alteration in the balance of thought and feeling that had held invariable now for many hours. It seemed to him that something heavy lifted, or rather, began to lift. A weight, a shadow, something oppressive that obstructed light. A ray of light, as it were, struggled through the thick darkness that enveloped him. To him, as he paused on the ridge to recover his breath, came this vague suggestion of faint light breaking across the blackness. It was objective. "See," said the girl in a low voice. "The moon is rising. It lights the sacred island. The blood-red waters turn to silver." He saw, indeed, that a huge 3/4 moon now drove with almost visible movement above the distant line of hills. The little tarn gleamed as with silvery armor. The glow of the sacrificial fires showed red across it. He looked down with a shudder into the sheer depth that opened at his feet, then turned to look at his companion. He started and shrank back. Her face, lit by the moon and by the fire, shone pale as death. Her black hair framed it with a terrible suggestiveness. The eyes, though brilliant as ever, had a film upon them. She stood in an attitude of both ecstasy and resignation, and one outstretched arm pointed towards the summit where her father stood. Her lips parted, a marvelous smile broke over her features, her voice was suddenly unfamiliar. "He wears the collar," she uttered. "Come, our time is here at last, and we are ready. See, he waits for us." There rose for the first time struggle and opposition in him. He resisted the pressure of her hand that had seized his own and drew him forcibly along. Whence came the resistance and the opposition he could not tell. But though he followed her, he was aware that the refusal in him strengthened. The weight of darkness that oppressed him shifted a little more. An inner light increased. The same moment they reached the summit and stood beside the priest. There was a curious sound of fluttering. The figure he saw was naked, save for a rough blanket tied loosely about the waist. "The hour has come at last," cried his deep, booming voice that woke echoes from the dark hills about them. "We are alone now with our gods." And he broke then into a monotonous rhythmic chanting that rose and fell upon the wind, yet in a tongue that sounded strange. His erect figure swayed slightly with its cadences. His black beard swept his naked chest, and his face, turned skywards, shone in the mingled light of moon above and fire below, yet with an added light as well that burned within him rather than without. He was a weird, magnificent figure, a priest of ancient rites, invoking his deathless deities upon the unchanging hills. But upon Holt, too, as he stared in awed amazement, an inner light had broken suddenly. It came as with a dazzling blaze that at first paralyzed thought and action. His mind cleared, but too abruptly for movement, either of tongue or hand, to be possible. Then, abruptly, the inner darkness rolled away completely. The light in the wild eyes of the great, chanting, swaying figure he now knew was the light of mania. The faint, fluttering sound increased, and the voice of the girl was oddly mingled with it. The priest had ceased his invocation. Holt, aware that he stood alone, saw the girl go past him, carrying a big black bird that struggled with vainly beating wings. "Behold the sacrifice," she said, as she knelt before her father and held up the victim. "May the gods accept it, as presently they shall accept us too." The great figure stooped and took the offering, and with one blow of the knife he held, its head was severed from its body. The blood spattered on the white face of the kneeling girl. Holt was aware for the first time that she, too, was now unclothed. But for a loose blanket, her white body gleamed against the dark heather in the moonlight. At the same moment, she rose to her feet, stood upright, turned towards him, so that he saw the dark hair streaming across her naked shoulders, and, with a face of ecstasy, yet ever that strange film upon her eyes, her voice came to him on the wind. "Farewell, yet not farewell. We shall meet, all three, in the underworld. The gods accept us." Turning her face away, she stepped towards the ominous figure behind and bared her ivory neck and breast to the knife. The eyes of the maniac were upon her own. She was as helpless and obedient as a lamb before his spell. Then Holt's horrible paralysis, if only just in time, was lifted. The priest had raised his arm. The bronze knife with its ragged edge gleamed in the air. With the other hand he had already gathered up the thick, dark hair, so that the neck lay bare and open to the final blow. But it was two other details, Holt thinks, that set his muscles suddenly free, enabling him to act with the swift judgment which, being wholly unexpected, disconcerted both maniac and victim and frustrated the awful culmination. The dark spots of blood upon the face he loved, and the sudden final fluttering of the dead bird's wings upon the ground, these two things, life actually touching death, released the held-back springs. He leaped forward. He received the blow upon his left arm and hand. It was his right fist that sent the high priest to earth, with a blow that, luckily, felled him in the direction away from the dreadful brink, and it was his right arm and hand, he became aware some time afterwards only, that were chiefly of use in carrying the fainting girl and her unconscious father back to the shelter of the cottage, and to the best help and comfort he could provide. It was several years afterwards, in a very different setting, that he found himself spelling out slowly to a little boy the lettering cut into a circlet of bronze the child found on his study table. To the child he told a fairy tale, then dismissed him to play with his mother in the garden. But, when alone, he rubbed away the verdigris with great care, for the circlet was thin and frail with age, as he examined again the little picture of a tripod from which smoke issued, incised neatly in the metal. Below it, almost as sharp as when the Roman craftsman cut it first, was the name Acella. He touched the letters tenderly with his left hand, from which 2 fingers were missing, then placed it in a drawer of his desk and turned the key. "That curious name," said a low voice behind his chair. His wife had come in and was looking over his shoulder. "You love it, and I dread it." She sat on the desk beside him, her eyes troubled. "It was the name Father used to call me in his illness." Her husband looked at her with passionate tenderness, but said no word. "And this," she went on, taking the broken hand in both her own, "is the price you paid to me for his life. I often wonder what strange good deity brought you upon the lonely moor that night, and just in the very nick of time. You remember?" "The deity who helps true lovers, of course," he said with a smile, evading the question. The deeper memory, he knew, had closed absolutely in her since the moment of the attempted double crime. He kissed her, murmuring to himself as he did so, but too low for her to hear. "Acella! My Acella!" The end. Best audiobooks for free hopes that you have enjoyed this production of The Tarn of Sacrifice by Algernon Blackwood. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble, as your subscription is the support we need to create more great free content. Please look to our website at bestaudiobooksforfree.com for a complete list of our audiobooks.